Welcome, Preity. On the behalf of Usanas Foundation, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to you and also to the participants who have joined us today. Once again, we are back with another session of Usanas Dialogues. And today we have a very interesting and a very bright personality with us, Preity Üpala. I'll be soon reading her bio, but to begin with, I must say that she is an expert on international relations, but at the same time, she is an actress very famous in Bollywood and Hollywood. So she likes to wear these different hats, and I don't know how she balances. I'll be asking her questions related to that during the interview. But first, I would like to just give her a brief bio to all our audience. Preity Üpala is a geopolitical strategist, media personality, and international speaker based in Los Angeles, California. Currently, she is the CEO of think tank the Omnia Institute, a board member of EUICC, that's European Indian Chambers of Commerce, and a chair at Horasis Global Summit. A former Miss India International, Preity has worked in Bollywood as well as Hollywood and in the four continents. She has been featured as well as she is one of the most sought after experts on CNN, Forbes, and Economic Times and Business Standard and World Economic Forum. Her articles have been published extensively in over 200 publications. She has spoken around the world at WEF, BRICS, etc. on the topics such as geopolitics, geoeconomics, BRICS, US-India relations, Indo-Pacific, international affairs, Asian century, multipolarity, and all sorts of different constructs that we can imagine in the world of international relations. So welcome, Preity. We're really delighted and honored to have you with us here today.
Namaste. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be here.
No, this is just the beginning of our association and engagement, and I hope to be more active and more vibrant with you in this engagement in the future. Today we are going to have a very interesting discussion, and that's majorly going to focus on India-US relationship. Which is going through very interesting twists and turns. India has emerged as a diplomatic leader amidst multiple wars. How do you describe this, and why has it been effective?
Well, that's a great question. I think maybe one of the best things for India during the last 5 years, post-pandemic and post-conflict, has been this amazing opportunity for it to really rise to the occasion, because everybody talks about this rising superpower, but I think the world was waiting for India to really show up, and it did show up. So on a number of issues, I mean, COVID, we can talk about it maybe another time, but for the scope of this conversation, I think it truly has emerged as perhaps one of the few powers in the world that is genuinely putting forward a proposition of dialogue and peace and diplomacy, while all other powers around the world were pushing for wars and prolonging the conflicts and really wanting to take this win without looking at its global ramifications and impact on the world. I think India was able to take a very neutral, balanced, nuanced point of view. And I think for the first time, we are seeing all of the global South and even parts of the West actually see that Indian point of view as well and agree with it and realize that the only way forward is dialogue, diplomacy. And I think it's been a great opportunity for India to showcase its abilities that it's always had, but I think it's really risen to the occasion. G20, of course, was a huge, huge win. I think objectively, one could say it was probably one of the most successful G20s, and a meeting that is not really looked upon with any great interest. I think internationally, this was one G20 that everybody looked at. It managed to get the joint statement, which I think is a miracle. It's nothing short of a miracle. I think very few countries would have managed to have done that. But it did that, and without ruffling really too many feathers. And I think people took notice of that there's another player in town there's another power here that does it in the Indian way. And I think this Indian way, as our great Dr. Jaishankar has now quoted or coined, I should say, the India way is a way. It's not West, it's not Soviet, it's not Russian, it's not Chinese, but it's the India way, another way of governance and diplomacy, I think. Specifically, I'd say peace and diplomacy that the world can adopt. And I think we're seeing the results. And now it makes this amazing opportunity ready for India in future to actually build on this and double down. And I think it can be louder, more vocal about its own concerns in the global South. You know, it's become the voice of the global South now. I don't think anyone can deny that. And I think it's a great step in the right direction. Long time coming, I would say, but the world is taking notice. And the next 5-10 years, I think, will be most crucial decade in the history of our planet, one could say, of the things that are emerging geopolitically. And I think India is going to have to play a very, very major role, but it's going to do it in its own way. It's going to do it in the India way. So I'm very excited. And I think there's a lot of people in the world that are actually very keenly interested to see how India will navigate. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Preity, for your insightful remarks. I think you have encapsulated India's true essence when you mentioned that India is talking about peace amidst all these different war cries coming from the various corners of the world. So this is what India stands for: Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, peace and the middle path. And you mentioned about that joint consensus, joint statement was a big achievement. Indeed, it was, and that's actually India's forte: tightrope balancing, literally and metaphorically, both ways. My next question is about the perception of India in the West. Today, we see that be it Europe or the US, they're very enthusiastic about India. Their think tanks, they want to study India. They want to know more about India. They're very hopeful about that. The credit rating agencies, the business sector, they're all very hopeful. You are the best person to tell us, how could India change its narrative in the West? You are sitting in the Western world. You are seeing things right there from your own eyes. So I think your perspective, will definitely add a lot of information to our knowledge. Please share your thoughts on this.
As India and as huge, large as India, for the world to know so little about it is quite perplexing, I have to say. But I think we're moving to a place where the world is genuinely curious, interested, keenly looking at. The spotlight is really on India. And it's been, I think it takes two to tango. I think that's fair to say. It's also India's job to present itself globally. I mean, I know very tiny European nations who have done almost a better job at presenting themselves globally and talking about their global narrative that the world has caught on to and understands more than I think what India has presented so far. So that's on us, I think. But I think we really get the hang of it now, and we have a great foreign office that is taking this very seriously. So we have to set the narrative, I think, there are many different ways to do this. I think for too long we have been rule takers. I think it's time that we become rule makers, with or without institutions like the UN Security Council, for example. I know that's something that's very important to some Indians, but I think increasingly we are realizing that even, I mean, beyond the UN, it's, countries will put forward their narrative and their policy and do what they need to do for their nations and also their place in the world. So I think we need to, this release the shackles, and there's no need to be fearful of what the West thinks. I think economically and militarily, I think we're in a position now where people actually do take us very seriously, and they listen very carefully to what we have to say. So this is an opportunity to finally put forth our side of things, our perspectives on various issues that I think for too long have been distorted globally, and nobody's ever taken the time to fix those narratives. It's never too late. I think in such an ever evolving, changing world, chaotic world that we live in, I think this is as good as time, as good a time as any to get that right. I think I've always spoken about Indian soft power, if the NRIs, the diaspora being such an important part of the Indian soft power. And I think we need to, well, Indian government needs to utilize them even more, I think, because I think what is happening so far, or what has happened so far, is very organic. It's natural. That's fantastic. But moving forward, I think it should be more intentional. Ultimately, policy and your long-term strategy, I mean, it's should be very intentional. You need to know your objectives. You need to be very strategic, navigate tactfully. But I think there needs to be a grand plan in place, which I'm sure there is. But I think the diaspora is there to be leveraged. I think they can be leveraged a lot more than even what they have been leveraged up to so far. And they're keen to get involved. We're seeing that. And great that FDI is coming in, but I think you need to open up India as this hotspot for education, university degrees, research, business, more trade, things like the solar sector, of course, the chip industry. That's a new niche here that we are definitely involved in, which is great. But I think there's all these other sectors that maybe we may have not looked at before. It's why not? Why can't India be the hub? We're doing it in sports already with cricket, IPL, but why not other sports? Absolutely. I think this runs far and wide, not just politics, but business, technology, the arts, entertainment. I see almost no other country that has the scale, the scope, the capacity, the interest, the capability to put on, this sort of ongoing exhibition for the world. And we are great at putting on exhibitions. We know that, and the world loves it. So I think we need to sort of very proactively do that. And I think as far as very critical narratives out there that have been coming up a lot in the media, in Western media, they need to be countered somehow in a very diplomatic, tactful way, because I think right now what's happening is there's no official statement on them. It's only very recently that some of these statements and the official press conference is happening, but it's a lot of private citizens sort of voicing their disdain, or that they're troubled by what they're reading, and that this is not quite the case. But I think, the US government, for example, will maybe not look at an opinion piece by some proud Indian American. I don't think they would take that as seriously as they would, again, a official statement, a press conference where they're specifically addressed. And also be transparent. Why can't we have nothing to hide? So be transparent, put the data out there. Data is king. It's all in the numbers. It's all in the facts and statistics. So, I mean, I think the facts actually are in our favor in all of these cases. So it's our job to really, I think, put that out there and make it very clear and easy and accessible for people to look it up for themselves. And I think they would be assured once they do that. So I look forward to, I think, more proactiveness in that area.
You are on mute. Boss, you are on mute.
Well, you mentioned with or without UN. That's a very brave statement. I am pretty sure Dr. Jaishankar would love that after watching this interview. And I agree with you. You rightly mentioned that sometimes we are being oversensitive to the criticism which is coming from different quarters or the different parts of the Western society. There are NGOs, civil society organizations, media organizations, and in a democratic country, definitely they have a right to express their opinion. And also, you mentioned that if some proud Hindu American writes anything, that doesn't get much traction here in India. Well, that is also something which I agree with you on that. But having said that, again, I would like to focus on an issue that is very critical to India these days. We are all talking about very strong India-US relationship, and certainly I agree that foundations are very solid, very strong, because both are one of the most powerful and vibrant democracies of the world. Yeah, however, there are some concerns and trust issues. Like recently, on this issue of Khalistan activists being very active in the US, also US alleging India of the democratic backsliding and minority oppression and all that. How would you like to look at them? I mean, can you share your thoughts on these issues?
Yes. So I think India should approach this relationship with the US with realism and pragmatism. So it's a relationship that has seen better days, worse days. I think we're at an interesting point now. I will say that this is the most strategically important relationship this century almost, I want to say, at least for the next 30 years. The India-US relationship will be the most consequential globally. And very soon, I think the world will see for themselves. The beauty of democracies is that we can disagree. We have the space to do that. We will always have friction. I think we'll never agree on everything. So the largest democracy in the world and the oldest democracy in the world will disagree on some things and have different perspectives. And I think that's very healthy and that should be cherished. And should be encouraged. And I want to see much more healthy debate and also mutual respect where you understand the other's point of view. So moving forward, I think and I hope that's the direction in which this relationship should steer towards. Now, as far as the specific issues, criticism on democracy and whether it's human rights. Again, I think it's fine to have these conversations. I think India is really moving into this global power shoes, let's say, and it needs to develop a slightly thicker skin, I would say, because it's petty countries and autocracies, dictatorships that get so ruffled when anybody criticizes them. And we can see this whether it's China or North Korea or any of these other sort of dictatorship or authoritarian governments. But democracies should take it on the chin more. I think they really need to be much more accepting, and also at the same time be fearless enough to also dish it out. I mean, there are so many issues with the US. I live here, and trust me, there's a billion problems here. And sometimes I think it's worse than a lot of developing countries. So there's plenty to in a very mature way to bring up as well that I perhaps we haven't done in the past. And there's a way to do it without being disrespectful and patronizing. I think both parties can exercise that way of communication. And I think specifically with what's going on with the Sikh separatism, the terrorism that we're seeing originally that came out of Canada, which is really a hotbed for this kind of activity. Couple of things. One, I think the joke's on Canada because what has been revealed is that they are the hotbed of gang warfare and all sorts of things that the world didn't know about. And suddenly everybody is finding out about all of this, and it's not a good look for them. And at a time when their own leadership is so unpopular and they have so many other issues. This was really not the hill to die on, but I think they've chosen it for some reason, and it's not going to end well for them. So and also people are coming to know about these other kinds of movements out there, which is very important. As far as the US is concerned, it's been a more mature, I think, interaction on this issue. There's no smoking gun. I mean, I think we're all waiting for this great evidence to show up. If there is the evidence, by all means, present it. And the government of India has, unilaterally, in no uncertain terms, made it very clear that it is doing everything it can to cooperate, that it wants to help, and it's here to investigate and do what it needs to do from its side. I don't think a country can do anything beyond that. So then the ball is in the Western court, let's say, until all this evidence shows up. But I think India should be taking this in stride as it has, and know that as this relationship grows, enough, these are small issues, growing pains. Nothing is more important than collaborating on technology, trade, business, security, nuclear, energy. And I think these two countries have so much to offer to each other and the world. And it goes beyond any of these little issues, and neither country should make these small issues bigger than what they are. Extra, what would you say, territorial assassinations happen all around the world. The US is a master at this. And I mean, don't tell me that only they had the right to take down a terrorist like Osama bin Laden. I think any country with the intelligence and the capability to do so should be able to rid the world of that kind of terrorism. In fact, perhaps we should see more of that. So I think this is a space where India can put its foot down and, put its security needs very much in front of the West. And they also really need to respect that, I think. So I think it'll work out well in the end for India, all said and done.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I mean, I absolutely agree with you that that India needs to be a little bit more thick-skinned, and I think this is how the bilateral relationship between two democracies work. They're more liberal, more easy, and more generous in terms of they don't have to be very sensitive. And India is also, as far as countering the narratives is concerned, India is also giving a very strong reply these days, and I mean, you can see it happening right away. You just see, I think day before yesterday, Government of India released a report which categorically mentioned that the minority community in India has risen in terms of their share of the total percentage of the population. The majority has gone down. Besides that, we have this mega festival of democracy, the biggest election going on in India, which is free and fair, and even someone like Modi, who has done exceedingly great work in India, is also getting a tough challenge and competition from the opposition. So that speaks itself, it speaks volumes for India's democracy. And I guess that is just getting more and more evident in the Western world also. So I think hopefully in the future, these things will smooth out. But overall, like, how do you look at the future of this relationship between India and the US?
I think this, as I mentioned, I think this is going to end up being the most important strategic partnership of the 21st century. Just how things are forming geopolitically. I think it's important for the West to understand that India is neither an official ally and it's not an adversary either. It is a friend. I think it needs to view India as a friend that it can trust and rely upon to do the right thing, because India is not a rogue state. It is the law and order and the rule of law, and being a democracy and being so, I would say, open, tolerant, syncretic, and secular in a way that I don't think any other nation is truly. I think the US needs to actually understand that. And, moving forward, again, we are not anti-West, we are non-West. And I think the West has this incapability, I would say, of not compartmentalizing everything. Everything needs to go in a box for them. They bifurcate everything, so you get a very disjointed sort of situation unfold. Whereas in the Indian way is totally the opposite. It's holistic. It's everything all encompassing. It's very omni in that way. And that poses a problem for the West because they can't, they see things in binaries and they can't understand how a country can be friends with both Palestine and Israel, both the US and Russia, North Korea and South Korea, and the West as well as the Arab world. India's always been like that. I think it's the only country that truly
Yes.
can balance it, and that's huge. But I think that needs to be stressed, and that message, that narrative actually needs to be pushed as like an ideal way, and how it's unique to the West in that way. It offers more maybe to the world, or maybe it's a very unique way of looking at the world at large that actually might be more helpful. So the relationship is growing ever so strong. China is obviously the big, the 10,000 pound elephant in the room. I think it's very important for the West, especially the US, to not see India just in terms of countering China, because that's not why India exists. It doesn't exist to counterbalance an adversary for some other power. I understand there's a lot of states that have volunteered for that. There's a lot of vassal states that are treated in such a manner, and they're happy to, and the US is known, that's a part of its foreign policy, is having all of these vassal states, but India is not one of them. And I think it needs to realize that it will never be a state of that nature, and its security needs are very valid, they're very unique, they're very different. What the West may see as a threat is not necessarily a threat for the rest of the world. I mean, a fun fact is, on the Russia-Ukraine conflict, 85% of the world actually disagrees with the West. They disagree with NATO. They don't see that conflict in the way that NATO does. 85%. It's the majority. It's actually a small minority that sees it in the way that they see it, right? And so at what point do we as a collective humanity, when do we really go with what is the global consensus on this? And how do we find a good balance where I think everybody's genuine security needs are addressed? So I think we need to move into that. I'm excited about this relationship. I think the beauty of India-US relationship is no matter which administration, whether it's Obama, Trump, Biden, everybody realizes that India is key, and even Democratic, they have bipartisan support. They've actually had that for many decades, so that says a lot about how the state apparatus actually views India. I think there's a big difference between the state and the street. Twitter is not the real world, and opinion pieces are not the real world. The real world is policy and how governments speak to each other, defense cooperations and all that. And in that area, I think we've never been better, and moving ahead, we'll get even more closer. So I definitely see a very, very exciting, and also I have to say, as Indian Americans get even more involved in US politics, I've never seen so many of them run and be elected. And I'm sure that the future president of the United States is going to be of Indian origin. And I think that day is not too far away.
Thank you. Thank you. In fact, here I would like to mention something which is more about the civilization connect between India and America. However, there is no proof about that, but that's something which I've heard from various religious scholars. So I don't claim that it's true or false, but I'm just telling you what I heard. They say that it's not just in the current times that India and US have a relationship, but back even in the times of Mahabharata, India and US had a relationship. And US was more like the Patal Lok. And the main character, Arjun from Mahabharata, he had visited the Patal Lok in those times. And also, probably he married some princess from there. But well, these are the areas which need a little more research and, I would say objective studies. So I won't get into the details here. Well, we have had enough of geopolitics. I'll get back to geopolitics after a little while. But before that, a little digression. Our audience would really love to know about that. You, as your biography, as your bio mentions that you are an actress in Bollywood. What made this transition happen from the world of acting to the world of geopolitics, from the world of little very fine aesthetics, romance, and entertainment, to the world of hard realism, counterterrorism, security? And are you still? Please tell us more about your stints at the Bollywood and Hollywood.
Well, that's a great question. It's an interesting one. The before this move was another move, which was the move from investment banking and corporate world to Hollywood and Bollywood. So that itself was a huge jump. I thought that was as big a jump as it gets, but then when I moved here, I realized that all this other world that my knowledge, expertise, and interest and skills are suited to. So I'm a global citizen. I've traveled all around the world. I grew up in so many different countries, speak different languages, and have always felt at home no matter where I go. And I have such a love for anything that's really international and, our collective history and so on. So I think when I moved to LA, one, I realized that there was a need for a voice, a bridge, an ambassador maybe between the East and the West, because I felt like that wasn't there as big as it could be. And I saw myself as someone who could be that bridge because I'm very deeply rooted to my origin, my roots, and I have a good knowledge of my own history. But I'm, a very proud American, and I think the way I think and act is very West in that way, and I think the two actually marry pretty well. So I felt like I can articulate this amazing civilizational history of India more. You have many other people doing it too now, but I saw that role for myself. That's one thing. The other thing is, I think, as someone who is genuinely interested in what's happening in the world, I took a look around my own world here and I realized everything is global. We're all connected. And I think this is even pre-COVID when there was so much happening geopolitically. And I realized that this is going to affect all of us. And I think someone needs to be speaking about these things more. And I felt like I was that person with the voice as well as the maybe the right knowledge to sort of put forward. And then of course we had a series of global events, and it really threw me in this world of media and politics, both India and US. And now I'm like deeply entrenched in it. And the more I see, the conversations, the level of the discourse, I think we actually need stronger voices. We need stronger voices for India, for the India way, for multipolarity, for the global South, the changing world order. I think this is something, the Asian century, these things I speak a lot because I think here in the West, people don't tend to know excuse me, what's happening much around the world. And they have no interest up until we had COVID and then these conflicts that now we are totally engulfed in. And it's affecting everyone. So now suddenly they're interested to know about the world around them. And this is just perfect timing, I think, for me. And maybe what the foreign policy think tank world also lacks, I think, is again, some people who can communicate well, people who are maybe more, who have a good understanding of the real world out there, because this is not an academic exercise. We're talking about lives, we're talking about countries, people, billions of people are involved. And I think you need more compassion, more empathy, more uh, humaneness that sometimes really lacks in these sort of think tank worlds, or even any political environment. So I think that's what the arts gives you, So I think I really mix the two, and I feel like it's
It's
a very
something
unique
very.
role. Yeah, I like it very much. So, yeah.
I'm particularly interested in this art side because long back I watched that movie Octopussy, which was the Bond movie. It was shot in India. I guess Roger Moore acted in that. And it was early 80s, and it was shot in my city, Udaipur. The way the Western directors captured my city was beautiful. After that, we had some joint Indo-Russian productions like Shalimar and all that. But we are still waiting for the truly Indian international mega venture on in the movies. Recently, we can give some examples like Bahubali and RRR, but still something which can truly capture the international audience. If that comes from Bollywood, that would be great. Some kind of an espionage drama which captures India's spirituality, the mystics living up in the mountains, and also India's mysterious violence in the two-tier smaller cities of India. And perhaps you can be the lead actress in that. That's something which I really look forward to. That has to happen.
Well, a great idea, and you should work on it, and maybe we might co-produce this thing.
I would.
Avatar, it's a shame because Avatar was, even the name Avatar and the whole concept of it, and the director talks about it. He's like, I was inspired by Hinduism, and this is a term that comes straight out of Hinduism and Indian culture and Indian tradition, and I was so blown away with it, and I thought the world needed to see this otherworldly universe, and that's what he gave an Avatar. It remains the highest grossing movie of all time, and it's a shame that that didn't come from India, but then the director is masterful. It's hard to top that, I guess. But yes, I think in the future, I think instead of focusing on poverty, and honestly, you go to India, you don't even see the all
Yeah.
of. I mean, it's almost like they're fictionalizing all of this. This is not. I am yet to find all of this stuff in India. You have to focus on the spiritual, yes, and then on everything that's fabulous, hip, interesting, modern, and maybe high tech, the parts of India that are actually more advanced than the West in some ways. They are. So we must focus on all of that, I think.
I would love to work on that. In fact, so far, I have written mostly on terrorism, intelligence, and security issues. But from all my interviews and all my field work, I guess I already have a plot ready for a good espionage thriller. And so there used to be one series in the US very popular, Blacklist. And this guy Raymond Reddington was the lead role, was the main guy in that series. Very interesting. We loved it. But after the 10th season, we thought that they would come with some another at least one more season focusing on India with some plot which works from through Delhi or Calcutta or something like that. But then they ended. No worries, we still look forward to creating some good story from the Indian Bollywood. Coming back to geopolitics, a while back you mentioned about the multipolar world order. Definitely we are moving towards multipolarity. This may be an asymmetric multipolarity or an unbalanced multipolarity. But how do you look at India's role in this emerging multipolar world?
So the world is definitely moving from a unipolar and bipolar world to a multipolar universe. In fact, I almost want to, this is a phrase that I've coined. It's the omnipolar world, where it's similar to multipolar, I guess, but it just sounds a little bit more sexy, omnipolarity. But look, there are many different power centers, as there should be. The world is not some monolith, and you don't want one hegemon to control, and you certainly don't want one hegemon in the East and one in the West, which is, I think, what this US China wanted for a very, very long time, until they realized that that's actually not safe, healthy, or sustainable. And so that's gone now, thank God. And I think that India is really the bulwark against China in the multipolarity world. It's funny, China wants a multipolar world, but they want a unipolar Asia. They want to be the only power in Asia, and then they want this beautiful world out there, and you have the US and you have a few other centers, Russia, and that's not how the way the world works. If you want to truly be multipolar, that includes Asia, in fact, specifically Asia. And I think China is very rattled by the fact that in its own backyard, it's really not numero uno. I always say this. I think there's a misconception that the West thinks China is only sees the West as its peer competitor. But, I mean, it's definitely a peer competitor, but it sees India. It's not just a nuisance or an obstacle or in the way. It's more threatened by India than it lets out. And I think it's important for everybody to know China's game as far as the Indo-Pacific, our own Asian region is concerned. And it's important for the West to realize how much of a threat India can pose to China on various levels, but including respect and likability. I mean, you go around the world, when people think of India, they only have, I think the public sentiment is incredibly positive. Like I travel all around the world, and everywhere I go, the topic of India comes up, and I would say almost 10 out of 10 times it's positive and they love India. China is not the case at all. It might be the opposite. It's like, yes, they understand that it's a power to be reckoned with, but as far as, feeling that you can trust and rely on it, and likability and all of that stuff, it's really pretty low. It ranks pretty low, and this is something that we should be actually be leveraging and manipulating, I think, which I don't think we've quite done. So I think multipolar world is an exciting world to be in. BRICS, of course, is the big component of that, and now we have the BRICS plus, the expansion, which is bringing in more powers. And I think the West also needs to not see BRICS as some kind of anti-US contingent. It's not. BRICS is not anti-NATO or anything like that. It's about really emerging economies wanting to come together and, go to the next phase, which is prosperity and abundance, because they can have it too. And how do they work together to make that happen with each other? What you don't want is a China-led BRICS, which there has been some attempt to make BRICS be a China-led BRICS, but I don't think it succeeded. I don't think it will succeed, because I think maybe countries like India, South Africa, and Brazil might not want that, and they should really stand up to that point. And then we'll have a more, I think, just a more fair and open BRICS, which is what you want. And then now the expansion, of course, makes it even more trickier to have a hegemonic power there, because you got a lot of Middle Eastern countries there with very different resources and different interests now that are in the game. So I think BRICS is fantastic. I think India should be the anchor for the BRICS. They should be almost like the soul for the BRICS in some way. They should be the almost maybe the voice for the BRICS too. I don't see why not, because I feel like they are the voice for the global South. So I think it's an exciting world. India has to find its place in this multipolar world and within BRICS, and also in its relationship with EU, NATO, and the US. I think these are all interesting relationships that it needs to juggle. I think it is going to get there in the end. I think it knows where it stands and where it needs to go. So it's just a matter of really putting your money where your mouth is and being brave, and I think walk like you talk, you know, and be the real thing, so that the whole world can really respect that. Because I think what the world is looking for is someone or some country to respect, because there isn't much of that to look up to anymore, at least not here in the West. So I think a country like India can really rise in this environment.
Thank you. Thank you. I think you're right. Well, multipolarity is the spirit of this age, and we are past the age of military alliances. However, I still see groupings emerging, like you mentioned about BRICS, then you have SCO, we have Indo-Pacific. There's nothing wrong with these groupings, but at some level, there are some states who would try to give that color to them, which make them a little more military centric. But then definitely, there are different kinds of states, with some with military systems, some with revanchism, etc. But yes, the overall idea is the multipolarity is the buzzword. But still, I see two major alliances today in the world. Like Indo-Pacific has come up, though Indo-Pacific is not making specifically and overtly against itself against China in its pronouncements and statements. They are focusing on climate change, technology exchange, etc. On the other hand, you have this rudimentary structure coming up where you see China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and a couple of other countries like Turkey also partly in that. So given that, I would really like to know your thoughts on the future of the Indo-Pacific. You also
Well,
mentioned about China and India being, US seeing India as a bulwark against China. So with all these things in the backdrop, how do you look at the future of the Indo-Pacific, the Quad grouping?
The Indo-Pacific region is going to end up being, I think, one of the most pivotal regions in the world moving forward. This is it, I think people in the US and the West, they forget that they don't share a border with China. The only country of consequence that shares a border with China is India, as far as they're concerned. So they, I think, sometimes fail to pay attention to regions that aren't around, immediately around their own territories, and wars that they're involved maybe even thousands of miles away, like the ones that we're seeing today. But they forget about the real regions where you have like engulfment, you have this circlement going on so many levels. You got all sorts of sea activity. Let's say there's a lot of action out there in the oceans that no one's really paying attention to. I think the navies are going to be pivotal, including the US Navy. Will have to be, I think, utilized at some point. They talk a lot about Taiwan, but I think more what's going on in the Indo-Pacific, because that's also where a lot of the trade comes in, and I think it's important for a country like India to have, of course, very good relationships with its much smaller neighbors, just because some of these are these very, very pivotal ports of access, Maldives, Sri Lanka, and India needs to be on very good terms with them and not be in a situation where they've been taken over, and India suddenly lost control of its own parts of that region and can't control its own trade, ships and cargoes and security threats and all of that, because that's a reality. So I think Indo-Pacific is extremely important. I think the Quad was a great idea. Great that it's been re-energized. The Quad originally was supposed to be more of a security mechanism. They don't say it, but it was set up to check China's dominance and belligerent activity in the Indo-Pacific region. That was the intention. But I think in the past few years, we've seen it move from that to climate change, COVID, human rights, and all sorts of other things, while the real threat is not sort of being really looked at. So I think you either need to go back to your original mandate for what Quad is, and you really need to get very serious about security activity over there, or you have to come up with another grouping of willing parties that have the capacity and that are willing to do what it takes. Now there's a new Quad. I think the people are calling it the Squad. Where you have the Philippines in place of India. That should be very, very worrying for Indian government, because they should be irreplaceable in this quadrant, and for them to just be replaced by another country that's actually very willing to counter China, that's not a good thing for India. They will be replaced, and you'll be in a situation where you will really be out of the game, even though the threat is a direct threat to you, right? So I think you can involve the Philippines in some way, absolutely, and work closely with them. But I think India needs to maybe start leading the Quad, and because the parties are interested absolutely to do something before it's too late, so to speak. But I think it needs to be a focus. I think depending on this election, who gets elected, we will see Quad back on the table as a serious point, I think, to be discussed. Yeah, and I'd like to see that. Even if it's the same administration that comes back, it should really be front and center of their foreign policy.
Thank you. I appreciate your realistic take on Quad, and also the thought that India should take a leadership in Quad. Well, India has its own compulsions, but sometimes we really get very confusing signals from the US. Like recently, the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen made a visit to China, then Secretary Blinken made a visit to China. All sorts of these exchanges going on between China and the US. Then Australia are really warming up to Chinese. So sometimes India gets confusing signals, but no worries. I think, all these things will be more or less clear and more or less, in a better shape in the near future. But before you wind up, I have two quick questions. You already mentioned about NRI spreading Indian soft power, and I can see that you are already a celebrity in the Indian diaspora in the US. Can you tell us a little more about the role of diaspora, and how is Indian diaspora evolving in the American setup these days?
I think the diaspora is indispensable in India's soft power and its image globally. Today, Indian Americans are the most educated, successful, wealthiest, charitable, philanthropic, law-abiding group in the greatest country in the world, in the history of the world, right? It's interesting that it's really us that have come to the apex of that, to the absolute pinnacle of that's incredible. That says a lot about India, and it says a lot about the US too, that it's has a system where that can happen. So that's fantastic. We're getting involved in politics finally, after I think a long time of not being very political. But now we realize that if we're not on the table, then we're on the menu. And I think we were on the menu for a long time. So now we're coming to the table. And it's fantastic to see candidates run for president of the United States, whether on the left or right. I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy has done incredibly well. I'm stunned to see how popular he has been with even evangelical Christians and the staunchest of the right, and within the GOP. He's been because I think he breaks those barriers and he goes beyond all of that, and people just love the message, and he's so articulate. And then on the left also, you have some great leaders. And then of course, you have the wonderful Tulsi Gabbard. She's not Indian, but she's a proud Hindu, and she is, I think, sort of really articulated her faith very well to show the US, how compatible I think Hinduism is and how relevant. And honestly, it's like, I think the framework to move forward with. I think there's a lot that we can take from Hinduism that would help us in the coming years because of its holistic framework. So the diaspora is amazing. The American public sentiment towards India is extremely positive because their doctor is Indian, their lawyer is Indian, their accountant is Indian. And when they see that, they only have them in highest regard. And regardless, they don't read opinion polls, so opinion pieces in, legacy media and things like that. That just doesn't happen. So, that's why I think the diaspora should get even more involved. And they have to realize that when they may be living here for the last 50 years, on some level, they still represent India and Indians. And I think it's amazing to be proud of that. And, I think talk about how the two can work together, how similar they are. I think moving forward, the diaspora is going to increase in size. They're going to be more political. They're going to be more successful. Now we're seeing them in the arts too. So even Hollywood and TV, which I think is needed because we're still a small minority, but I think we have a voice. We have a lot to share. And I think the world is looking for the kinds of things that we want to share. Like I talk a lot about yoga, meditation, spirituality, Indian feminism and Indian philosophy. And these things are exactly what the world is looking for, and media specifically is looking for. And whether it comes from someone from India or an Indian American who's talking to that, I think it's very important. So that's why I continue to be a loud voice here and to make my presence, I think, felt and to be heard, and want to do much more of that and get even more exposure and access and visibility, I think, moving forward. So the diaspora, I think, is indispensable to India's soft power.
Thank you. Thank you. So my last question, what are Americans thinking about the Indian election? And you have elections coming very soon. So what is the overall feeling, atmosphere in the US?
I think as far as the Indian elections go, I think they don't know any of the opposition parties. They're not keen. They're not looking. The average American doesn't know, other than the fact that there's this largest election on the planet happening, which I think is quite impressive, and 1 billion people voting, which is very impressive. They look at Indian elections and they think, wow, these people have it down. They got it organized. It's tamper free. It's can't be hacked. It's not a fake election, can't be scammed. Because I think they're questioning their own elections that have passed, and they're very scared about this coming election because there's a large number of people, especially within the GOP, that does believe that the election was stolen last time. Whether it was or it wasn't, that is their belief. It's not a small number, it's quite a large number. And you have half of the country actually questioning whether or not this is the government that people voted for. And I think for a democracy to be in that position is very, very unfortunate, and it's very sad. The state of affairs of American democracy is, I think, the lowest that I've ever seen, lowest in history, absolutely. So but I think they understand. I think the establishment and even critics of the Modi government have accepted that he will be elected again. I would say most likely, and unless some miracle happens or some unseen for circumstance that really takes people by surprise, and things do happen, surprises do happen, but I think everybody pretty much is pretty comfortable with the fact that it's going to be a third term of Modi, a different term, I think, and they're just getting organized and getting themselves ready on how to deal with that. Coming to the US elections, it's a whole other story. I think it's America today really needs to find its soul. It is the most divisive, hateful, fearful place it's been, where you have people that literally can't stand each other. This is not just Twitter. In this case, it's not just Twitter wars and the hate and bigotry that you see on Twitter and the divisiveness, it's actually on the ground as well. You're seeing it with protests, you're seeing it with many political movements where I think the country's divided into two, and there's two groups. And it's going to get more deepened, and the gap is widening. And I think the outcome of this election is very important to keep America's soul intact, but also how the rest of the world will be affected, because I think what happens here will affect foreign policy most importantly, and it'll affect the world. There is a lot of talk of, we know the two people that will be elected, but honestly, there's a lot of talk also that neither of them may be the nominees, and they will be two new, younger candidates that are at the 11th hour, they will be parachuted in on both sides, because I think there is a appetite for that. And then it'll be, it's not Biden Trump anymore. It may be maybe Newsom Haley, those, I think that's a name that keeps names that keep coming up, but it could be someone else too. I think Trump's VP pick will be pretty indicative of the way that this election might go. So I think no one will be foolish enough to say that they know the outcome of this election. Also, I think the most important thing for the US is that there is electoral integrity, that you have a fair election, whoever wins, even if it's the party that you don't like, that it's the party that the country voted for and that the American people voted for, right? So that's their power that they have. That's their democratic right. And if you take that away from them, then how are you better than a tin pot dictatorship that that doesn't even have elections, because the outcome is exactly the same. So my advice to the US is that you should outsource your elections to India, get them to come in and organize a fair election where you'll have EVMs, it'll be electronic, plus you'll have a paper trail. Everything will be counted. You'll know the results in a few hours, and by noon you'll know the victor, and there are no surprises, and the exit polls will reflect the winner, and then you can have a big celebration. I think they can organize that as well. But if they had some sense, they honestly, it's a good idea. And the West always sends observers to developing countries to observe elections. I think this election, the rest of the world should be sending observers, and India should do this too, to actually watch these people count the votes and make sure that all kinds of ballot harvesting isn't happening in the middle of the night, because there's all kinds of talk about what may have happened last time, and I don't think you want a repeat of that. So I think the world should watch very keenly, and if there's something a little that's not kosher, I think there should be an uproar. And I think the world should be actively engaged in this election.
Well, I guess MBA should take your suggestions hands down, and they should send observers. And you're right.
I have a question, Abhinav.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Please.
My camera is still not working properly. So Preity, I have a very small question. Thanks for all your insights. And I mean, you are the right person. I thought that, I can ask you this question. I've been thinking for a while that Hollywood is like the largest film industry in the world. And after Hollywood, it's China, and the third is India. But when it comes to mainstream Hollywood movies, we see that Hollywood is fascinated with mainstream artists. They rope in these mainstream stars from India for star like and at the last biggest star who was in the biggest mainstream movie, I think, was Irfan Khan. I think it was Jurassic Park, and apart from that, there are these mainstream stars who are outsourced and who are imported and who star there. What about these Indian Americans? Because diaspora is one of the biggest strength of India-US relations, and when it comes to Indian Americans, I think Dev Patel is a very strong face. and he has made it very big there. But still, I mean, I see that there is this lack of, or this dearth of, the presence of Indian American stars. I'm sure there are a lot of Indian Americans who are pursuing fine arts, acting, and those courses there. So I mean, on that front, what do you, is there a deliberate effort to take this forward, or will that happen anytime sooner, or is it already happening and we are unaware of that? What do you think?
That's a really interesting question. I think up until a few years ago, the Indian American kids, they would never study acting, or they would never take up a profession in music or singing. It was just the STEM fields and business, just the usual. I think as I think multiple things are happening. India is suddenly in the spotlight, which is it's very appealing for everybody, and they realize that their own culture is very much in the news, whether it's yoga or vegetarianism, Bollywood, and so on. So that's good. So soft power and pop culture, we are very represented, so it makes it easier. So I think of like recently, I would say only maybe in the past 5 years or so, you see a lot more younger Indian American students pursuing a career that is like a road less taken, let's say. Like I have. It's a very it's still the exception and not the norm, and it's still a small minority, I think, that pursue it, but they see the great success. I think also what's happening is they're, instead of looking at it as oh, we have to compete with Bollywood, I think maybe they're realizing Bollywood can be leveraged to open doors for them here. In that way, I mean, they have to open their own doors, but because it is so, something like an RRR, when it wins the Oscar, suddenly everyone's interested. I think then you can put yourself out there and show what you have, and I think there would be more takers. So leverage what's going on in Bollywood, and Hollywood itself is going through a churn. It's going through a lot of financial issues. The structure, the studio system is going down. How they finance movies and distribute movies is changing. So now we might see a more international sort of entertainment business here. The streaming services are going to be more international. I think it's changing to a point now where, even Indian professionals sitting in India can be involved, and Indian American professionals over here can also be involved in global projects. So I think it is happening. I actually see more traction in the stand-up comedy area. There's a handful, I can name at least five, mostly male, but they are Indian American comedians, and they are hilarious, and they're very popular, and because they can speak a language that the Americans understand, the way that they communicate, the way that they talk, their lingo, so it's not a cross-cultural thing. There are no barriers in that way. It's just another American comedian who happens to be Indian and can draw from some of the positive stereotypes, I would say, and make fun of it. We used to have Russell Crowe Russell Peters for many years, who was the only one, and now I think you have a string of them, which is great. So in stand-up comedy, talk show, broadcasting, maybe more presenting, news as well, you're seeing more faces. So it's not just Hollywood, but I think it's all this other world that they're coming up. And again, a very small minority, but I think they're actually quite, I mean, I don't want to say overrepresented, but relative to the size, they're doing well. And I think moving forward, they're going to just claim it more. So we'll see many more Indian faces on American TV for sure.
Okay, thanks, Preity. Thanks for your answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Preeti. So I think we come to the end of our today's discussion, and you share your excellent insights on topics ranging from multipolarity to China to Indo-Pacific to BRICS and the India-US elections. We're really very humbled and honored to have you for this today's discussion. And we look forward to engaging you more often for our online events, and also looking forward to inviting you for our offline conferences in India and abroad. Okay. So once again, thank you for joining us. I would also like to thank my team for their efforts and also the people who joined us as audience today. Thank you.
Thanks a lot,
Namaskar.
Preity.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's such a pleasure, and love to come back, and also love to see you in person for your future conference. I'd
Yes.
really be delighted to be involved.
Nice to see
We are
you.
looking forward.
Thank you so much.